everyone, I'm Dee, and this, as always, is my BFF and feline life mate, Stud. Together, we dive into fascinating and often haunting stories that keep us captivated. Today, we're tackling a story that's both tragic and deeply unsettling, a routine flight that ended in disaster. How did an ordinary commute turn into one of aviation's most chilling true crime stories? We're about to uncover the dark tale of Pacific Southwest Airlines Flight 1771, the events leading up to it, and the lasting impact it had on air travel. So grab a seat and let's explore this unforgettable chapter in aviation history. How can an everyday routine flight turn into a deadly tragedy? Imagine sitting on an airplane, trusting the crew, thinking everything is safe. But unbeknownst to you, a hijacker is on board, and the flight you're on will soon become a devastating disaster. This is the story of Pacific Southwest Airlines Flight 1771, a flight that took off from Los Angeles in 1987, but tragically never made it to its destination in San Francisco. On December 7, 1987, Flight 1771, a routine commuter flight operated by Pacific Southwest Airlines, would become infamous in the history of aviation for all the wrong reasons. The aircraft would crash into the hills of San Luis Obispo, California, killing all 43 people on board. What made this particular tragedy so unsettling was not just the crash, but the horrifying sequence of events that led to it. A disgruntled employee armed with a gun hijacked the plane mid-flight, leading to an uncontrollable descent that left investigators, families, and the aviation world searching for answers. Before diving into the specifics of Flight 1771, it's important to understand the airline involved, Pacific Southwest Airlines, better known as PSA.
There's an airline up here with comfortable 5 across seating on every flight. It's not this one. It has 6 across seating. Not this one. It's too crowded. This one? And certainly not these. Only one airline in the West gives you 5 across seating on every plane in the sky. PSA. So why sit still for anything less comfortable?
Catch our smile, PSA.
Founded in 1949, PSA was a regional airline serving the western United States with a focus on low-cost flights. It was known for its friendly and personal service, earning a loyal customer base, and quickly became a popular choice for travelers on short-haul routes. At the time of the incident, PSA had a good reputation for safety and punctuality. The airline was a subsidiary of the larger U.S. Air, and its flights were mostly domestic, connecting cities like Los Angeles, San Diego, and San Francisco. Flight 1771 was scheduled to fly from Los Angeles to San Francisco on December 7, 1987, with 39 passengers and 4 crew members aboard. It was supposed to be just another routine flight on any ordinary day, but it would end in tragedy. Flight 1771 took off from Los Angeles International Airport at 4:15 p.m., bound for San Francisco International Airport. The flight was being operated on a Boeing 737, a plane that had been in service for many years and was considered safe and reliable. Everything about the flight seemed ordinary, until it wasn't. As the flight ascended and reached cruising altitude, it appeared to be just another uneventful flight, with passengers settling in for the 70-minute journey. Among the passengers were people from all walks of life, business people, tourists, and airline staff. Unbeknownst to them, one passenger harbored a deep anger that would soon turn this flight into a nightmare. As with any tragic event, the victims of Flight 1771 had their own stories, and it's important to remember who they were. Among the 43 people aboard were passengers who were on business trips, holiday travels, and even a few who worked for PSA. But one of the most significant figures on the flight was the hijacker, David Augustus Burke. David Burke, a former employee of PSA, had been fired by the airline just days before the incident. It's believed that his firing triggered a series of events that led to the hijacking. Burke had been working as a ramp agent, but his work performance had been increasingly erratic. Over time, his personal life was falling apart, including a divorce that he was struggling to cope with. These personal issues, combined with his anger towards PSA, created the perfect storm for disaster. David Burke was a 35-year-old man with a history of anger management problems. In the days leading up to the hijacking, Burke's life had taken a sharp downward turn. His recent firing from PSA had left him feeling humiliated and bitter. He had been caught on CCTV stealing approximately $69 from in-flight cocktail sales. His ex-wife, who had custody of their 2 children, also reported him as emotionally unstable, further escalating his feelings of resentment. Just 3 days before the plane crash, he took his girlfriend and her young daughter on a 6-hour drive at gunpoint. On the morning of December 7th, Burke went to the airport with a gun in his bag, planning to confront his former employer. He boarded Flight 1771 in a calm, seemingly normal manner. He didn't attract any suspicion as he went through the standard screening processes and boarding procedure. What passengers didn't know was that Burke was about to take control of the aircraft, and the lives of everyone on board would change in an instant. After boarding the plane, Burke wrote a message on an air sickness bag. The note read, "Hi Ray, I think it's sort of ironical that we end up like this. I asked for some leniency for my family. Remember? Well, I got none, and you'll get none." The message was meant for his former manager, Ray Thompson. Thompson had denied Burke's request to have his employment reinstated and was a passenger on the doomed flight. It's unclear whether or not Burke had given Thompson the note. About 20 minutes into the flight, things began to go horribly wrong. Burke pulled a Smith & Wesson Model 29 44 Magnum revolver from his bag and began his violent takeover. He immediately shot and killed the flight's captain, Captain Greg Lindemood, and the first officer, James Howard Nunn, leaving the flight without any trained pilots. Also killed in the cockpit was flight attendant Debbie Nissen-Neal. This was a critical turning point, and the cabin crew and passengers would soon realize that something was terribly amiss. But by the time the passengers became aware of the hijacking, the plane had already begun to spiral into a terrifying, uncontrollable descent. The flight attendants tried to maintain order in the cabin, while the passengers, now in sheer panic, could only brace for what was coming. As Burke's grip on the situation tightened, the horror of what was happening became clear. Communication to air traffic control from Flight 1771 was brief, leading authorities to believe events happened in quick succession. About halfway through the flight, Oakland Air Route Traffic Control Center received a short message from the first officer, who reported that gunshots had been fired on board. The cockpit voice recorder recorded those gunshots, as well as muffled conversations, including a female, presumed to be a flight attendant, telling the cockpit crew, "We have a problem." The captain replied, "What kind of problem?" Then a shot was fired, presumably killing the flight attendant, and Burke announced, "I'm the problem." 2 more shots can be heard, presumably killing and/or incapacitating the pilots. Several seconds later, the CVR picked up increasing windscreen noise as the airplane pitched down and accelerated. Clearly, Burke was focused on his revenge and had no intention of surrendering. The remains of the flight data recorder indicated the control column had been pushed forward, most likely by Burke, causing the aircraft to dive. A final gunshot was heard, followed not long after by a sudden silence. It speculated that the final shot fired by Burke had killed the airline's chief pilot, who was also on board as a passenger and who may have tried to reach the cockpit to save the aircraft. At 4:16 p.m., the plane crashed into the hillside of a cattle ranch in the Santa Lucia Mountains near Paso Robles and Cayucos. The plane was estimated to have crashed at a speed of around 770 miles per hour, disintegrating instantly. It's estimated that the aircraft hit the ground at 5,000 times the force of gravity and was traveling at an approximately 70-degree angle towards the south. There were no survivors. The crash left a terrible scene of destruction, and the search for the wreckage was intense. The cause was immediately clear. Pilot error wasn't to blame. The fact that Burke had hijacked the plane and caused its demise was confirmed in the wreckage and through the investigation that followed.
Employees of Pacific Southwest Airlines, PSA, observed a moment of silence for the victims of Flight 1771. The crash on Monday killed 43 people in Central California. And as NBC's Don Oliver reports, there is even more evidence tonight linking a fired employee to the nightmare scenario of revenge and gunfire.
Know that fate has dealt with them and their loved ones unfairly.
In an airport hangar in San Diego, co-workers at a memorial service for the 8 employees of Pacific Southwest Airlines who died in the crash of Flight 1771.
Howard Nunn, Ray Thompson.
Thompson was believed to be the target of a former airline employee who was thought to have brought the plane down in a volley of gunfire. His name was not mentioned here, but at the crash scene near Paso Robles, the FBI said handwriting on a threatening note found in the wreckage was definitely that of the fired employee, David Burke.
There is no longer any doubt as to who wrote the letter addressed to Ray.
The FBI also thinks it knows how Burke got a gun and bullets by the metal detectors in the PSA terminal at Los Angeles International Airport. According to an affidavit, the FBI was told by the airline that Burke was allowed to bypass security screening because as an airline employee, he was familiar to the security guards. The company which provides security here says its internal investigation shows proper FAA procedures were followed. But the general manager of the airport thinks the FAA ought to review its security plan.
Or they may find that the plan is okay, it's the implementation of the plan which was not. I'm not sure.
This week, a television newsman bypassed security, carrying the expired credentials of a former airport food service worker. The former airport employee also retained gate keys.
I feel it's my duty to let the people know that it is not a secure airport. It has a lot of flaws, and we should pay attention to it.
Another memorial service today in Ojai, California. This for Jocelyn Kemp, one of 4 Chevron oil executives to die in the crash. As they mourned, friends and relatives wondered why so many had to die, so one man could satisfy a grudge. Don Oliver, NBC News, Los Angeles.
After the crash, the FBI and NTSB launched a full-scale investigation. They scoured the wreckage for clues, and it didn't take long before they pieced together Burke's role in the hijacking. Among the evidence found were his note to Thompson, as well as a piece of his finger still lodged in the trigger of the handgun, and 6 spent shell casings. Moreover, Burke's co-worker admitted to having loaned him the gun, and Burke had also left a farewell message on his girlfriend's telephone answering machine. Jackie, this is David. I'm on my way to San Francisco, Flight 1771. I love you. I really wish I could say more, but I do love you. The devastation left by Pacific Southwest Airlines Flight 1771 wasn't just a tragedy for those aboard the aircraft. It also had a profound impact on families of the victims. As the news of the hijacking and crash spread, families of the 39 passengers and 4 crew members had to come to terms with an unimaginable loss. Many were left in shock, unsure of the details of what had happened to their loved ones. The crash claimed the lives of James Silla, the president of Chevron USA, along with 3 of the company's public affairs executives. Additionally, 3 Pacific Bell officials were killed. The tragedy led many large corporations to implement policies prohibiting multiple C-level executives from traveling together on the same flight. The emotional toll was immeasurable, with survivors and family members of those aboard the flight struggling to process the violence and senselessness of the event. The victims' families expressed feelings of disbelief, anger, and grief over how their loved ones had perished in such a horrific way. For the families, it was more than just mourning the loss of loved ones. It was about making sense of the brutality that led to their deaths. The idea that a disgruntled former employee could hijack a plane and end the lives of so many innocent people was incomprehensible. The horrifying events of Flight 1771 highlighted serious flaws in aviation security protocols at the time. While hijacking had been a known threat, the severity and nature of the attack prompted the FAA to reevaluate airport and airline security measures. First, airlines began conducting stricter background checks and monitoring employees, including those who had been terminated, to identify potential security risks. Access controls were also tightened, making it harder for unauthorized individuals to bypass security screenings. In addition, new regulations strictly prohibited airline and airport employees from bringing firearms onto commercial flights, even if they were authorized to carry weapons off-duty. Security measures at smaller regional airports were also enhanced to match the standards of major hubs, closing critical gaps. Finally, employers in the aviation industry implemented more robust systems for monitoring employee behavior and addressing potential threats, particularly among those with access to sensitive areas or flight privileges. This incident served as a wake-up call, reshaping aviation security to better protect passengers and crews from internal threats. It shattered the perception that air travel was entirely safe from the threat of hijacking. For many, it was a reminder that while technology and security systems were in place, human factors, such as Burke's deep anger and willingness to commit violence, could still lead to catastrophic outcomes. The events of Flight 1771 also sparked broader conversations about workplace safety, mental health, and anger management. Burke's actions were influenced by his sense of betrayal and perceived humiliation from being fired, as well as his inability to deal with personal issues, including his divorce. In the wake of the tragedy, there were discussions about how workplaces could better support their employees' mental health and well-being to prevent such extreme outcomes. The incident also contributed to the ongoing conversation about domestic violence and mental health issues, which were under-addressed at the time. The legacy of this tragedy served as a reminder of the importance of both mental health support and strict security measures in preventing such horrific events from happening in the future. The hijacking of Pacific Southwest Airlines Flight 1771 remains one of the most haunting chapters in the history of American aviation. It was a tragedy that brought about significant changes in security procedures, workplace mental health awareness, and how aviation authorities responded to terrorist threats. Several federal laws were passed after the crash, including a law that required immediate resignation or retirement from an airline or airport position. A policy was also implemented stipulating that all airline flight crew and airport employees were to be subject to the same security measures as airline passengers. Despite the changes that followed, the loss of life aboard Flight 1771 was a stark reminder of how anger, resentment, and personal grievances can lead to disastrous consequences. The victims of the flight, along with the families who lost their loved ones, are forever etched into the history of true crime and aviation. In the Garden of Hope section of the Los Altos Valley Memorial Park, a granite and bronze marker honors the 42 victims of Flight 1771, and a number of the passengers and crew are buried in that cemetery. In the years since, the lessons learned from Flight 1771 have resonated with both the aviation industry and the public. It's a reminder of how vulnerable we are to the actions of a single individual with violent intentions, and how vital it is to continue evolving our security measures, as well as support systems for those struggling with personal demons. The impact of Flight 1771 extends beyond just the tragedy itself. It serves as a turning point in aviation safety, policy, and societal awareness of the power of rage when left unchecked. The victims' families continue to honor their loved ones, and their stories are a testament to the resilience of those who survive after such a profound loss. Thanks for joining Stud and me for this deep dive into one of aviation's most haunting tragedies. If you found this story as thought-provoking and compelling as we did, please give the video a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and we'll see you in the next video. TTFN, ta-ta for now.